Hello, today we talk about the Icejade Archetype, and the release date you will see in the bottom left corner is always the OCG release date, and there's also a score I will give to every card, and in the end a deck profile, and the overall ranking of the archetype. So let's start! And we start with the first wave of the Icejade support back in 2021 with a quite good card, Icejade Tremora. You can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, special summon one water monster from your hand. And if a face-up water monster or monsters you control is destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card and then special summon one Icejade monster from your hand or graveyard except Icejade Tremora. And these are both once per turns. It helps to get your big boss monsters out of your hand, and the graveyard effect is very useful to gain further advantage should your Icejade monsters be destroyed, or your water monsters in general, since these cards, the first wave of support is very generic to water monsters. In a similar sense, the next card, Icejade Archetype, is also very nice. It has the same secondary effect like Icejade Tremora and a unique main effect. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can send one water monster from your hand to the graveyard, draw one card. This effect is good since later Icejade creations can equip themselves from the graveyard, so the discard is not really a minus in many cases, so feel free to use this card. And the next card, Icejade Tinola, also has the same secondary effect like Archetype and Tremora, and a unique main effect as you can send one card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one water monster in your graveyard, send this card from the field to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon the targeted monster. It's a Monster Reborn-like effect, but with a high cost investment. The best part about this effect really is that you can send any card from your hand to the graveyard. The Reborn effect is okay, not really necessary to play, but the secondary effect is nice. But let's talk about this essential card, the Icejade Cradle. Add one Icejade monster from your deck to your hand with a different name from the cards you control or in your graveyard. Did you notice that this card is missing any kind of once per turn? That makes this card pretty strong and should be played at 3 at all times, since it's like a rota without once per turn that can search your whole archetype. What more do you want? Later in the same year, the second wave of support for the Icejade Archetype really made this archetype stick out from the others. Let me introduce Icejade Evergreen, another essential card. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add any Icejade spell or trap from your deck to your hand. And when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets this card or targets it for an attack, quick effect. You can activate this effect. The next time this card would be destroyed by battle or card effect this turn, it is not destroyed. Also, special summon one water monster from your hand or graveyard except Evergreen, but return it to the hand during the end phase. Both are once per turns, of course. This card is your bread and butter for the whole archetype. It searches a very essential piece of lockdown that we come to in just a bit. And the second effect is very useful to get out generic water monsters too, and they are returned to the hand during the end phase, which makes cards like Crystal Girl, for example, pretty strong for this archetype. And here comes the first Icejade creation, the Kingfisher. He has a pretty useful effect as you can target one water monster you control and equip this card from your hand or field to it. And an Icejade monster equipped with this card can attack while in defense position, so like a super heavy samurai. And if it does, apply its death for damage calculation. And while this card is equipped to a monster, you can target a monster your opponent controls with ATK less than or equal to the equipped monster's defense. Special summon this card, and if you do, return the targeted monster to the hand. Did you notice a tiny little detail? The equipping effect is not a once per turn, only the bouncing to hand. So feel free to equip him to a monster, then special summon him by bouncing a monster, and then re-equipping him, all in the same turn. That makes him quite versatile and strong, especially for the next card we will talk about now. Let's talk about the boss monster of the archetype, very much essential, Icejade Cosmoclore. If a face-up card is in a field zone, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only special summon her once per turn this way. While Icejade Indian Cradle is on the field, monsters your opponent controls can only activate their effects the turn they are summoned. And if your Icejade monster battles an opponent's monster, that opponent's monster loses 1000 attack during the damage calculation only. Just a few things, so you can special summon her if any card is in any field zone, not just your own field zone, and the attack reduction effect stacks if multiple copies are on the field, so you can reduce the attack up to 3000 points if you have 3 Cosmo Claws on the field. So wouldn't it be nice if there would be a card that makes the effect monster lockdown perfect? But first, let's talk about the field spell, the Icejade Senate Indian Cradle. When this card is activated, you can add one of your Icejade monsters that is banished or in your graveyard to your hand. And once per turn, if a monster is normal or special summoned, except during the damage step, you can target a water monster you control. That monster, along with any face-up monster your opponent controls, loses attack equal to the targeted monster's original attack until the end phase of this turn. A few things. You can only activate one of this field spell per turn, but the attack reduction effect is a soft once per turn. So on the following turn you can use the attack reduction effect from your old field spell, then activate the new one and use the attack reduction effect again. Also, adding one of your banished Icejade monsters back to your hand is a very useful effect, especially considering the older Icejade monsters like Tremora, Acti and Tinula we talked about earlier. Next up is the Trap of the Archetype, the only one that exists currently, and a very underrated card. But let's read the effect first. So you can target one face-up card your opponent controls, destroy one Icejade monster you control. If you do, negate the targeted card's effects until the end of this turn. If a face-up water monster you control leaves the field by an opponent's card, except by being destroyed and except during the damage step, you can add to your hand or special summon one Icejade monster from your deck, and you can only use each effect of this card once per turn. So the first effect can negate any card on the field, for example Harpy's Featherstorm, Raigeki's, everything you want, and you destroy one of your Icejade monsters in the process, which triggers cards like Tremora, their graveyard effect. So Tremora, Acti and Tinula, they punish the opponent if he destroys your monsters, and if he removes them by any other way, then the Icejade Erosion punishes the opponent. And this erosion effect even triggers if your card is tributed, for example through a Kaiju, because it doesn't have to leave the field by a card effect. So even super polymerization, contact fusion, it doesn't matter. The erosion will trigger and special summon an Icejade monster from your deck. Pretty strong. So let's talk about an even better card, the Icejade Curse. While an Icejade monster and the field spell Icejade Senate Indian Cradle are on the field, your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters that were summoned that turn. And when a monster is destroyed by battle involving your Icejade monster, you can target one of those destroyed monsters, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack, and that is a once per turn. I think it's obvious, but if you have the field spell Cosmo Claw and Curse on the field, your opponent cannot activate any effect from monsters on the field, and it only affects the opponent. You can use everything normally, so this is pretty strong. Even better, the Icejade Curse ignores immunity through card effects, since it directly says it affects the opponent and not the opponent's monster. Furthermore, the second effect punishes the opponent if he destroys your monsters by battle, or if you destroy his monsters by battle, so this card is good all around. Next up is the first tuner of the archetype, the Icejade Creation Yugioh Archetypes. While this card is equipped to a monster, the equipped monster gains 400 attack and death for each banished monster. You can only use one of the following effects of this card per turn, and only once that turn. If this card is in your hand or graveyard, except during the damage step, quick effect. You can target one Icejade monster you control, equip this card to that monster you control. And while this card is equipped to a monster, you can special summon this card. This card is a perfect card to be discarded, since it can equip itself from the graveyard too. And for each banished Tremora, Acti, Tinula and the likes, your equipped monster gets stronger and stronger. even counting the opponent's monsters that might have been banished, and it gives defense too, which is very useful in combination with the Kingfisher. So let's talk about the synchro monster of the archetype, Icejade Archetype. She has a quick effect, in which you can make face-up monsters you control become unable to be destroyed or banished by your opponent's card effects for the rest of this turn. And then, if this effect was activated in response to the activation of an opponent's card effect, you can banish all cards with that name on your opponent's field and or in their graveyard. And if a card is banished by an opponent's card effect while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card, and each effect is a once per turn. It's important to note that the banishing effect of this card is non-targeting and can banish multiple copies of the same name. So Harpies and Cyber Dragons, sorry, many of your cards will be banished. Also, the protection effect on top of it makes your Icejade wall even more unbreakable. Oh, and she has 3k attack, so please play her. And next up is the Great Icejade Manifestation. If your opponent has a monster on their field and or in their graveyard, and you control a water monster, you can take an Icejade monster from your deck and either send it to the graveyard or special summon it. And if a face-up Icejade monster you control leaves the field by an opponent's card, except by being destroyed and except during the damage step, you can banish this card from a graveyard, then target one card your opponent controls and banish it. Each effect is a once per turn. So this card is a great consistency tool that punishes hand traps during your initial first turn or even cards like Nibiru. So it's a very nice card. And the next card is Icejade Archetype. You can discard one other Icejade card or water monster, special summon this card from your hand. Then you can special summon one Icejade token, Aqua, Water, level 3, attack 0, death 0. While the token is in the monster zone, the player who summoned it cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except water monsters. You can only use this effect of Icejade Archetype once per turn. And this card's name becomes Icejade Zenith Inion Cradle, while it is equipped with an equip card. And also it is a level 7 tuner, just like the Yugioh Archetypes. It's important to note that this is a one card combo into your synchro monster or any other level 10 water synchro monster. Also, just like the manifestation before, it sets up your graveyard with Tremora, Acti, Tinula and the likes to prepare your reborn effects if your monsters should get destroyed. And it can treat itself as a field spell, which makes the lockdown even easier to achieve. So in total, this card is pretty strong. Next up, let's take a look at a pure deck recipe which aims to use the maximum potential Icejade can have. As you can see, I use every card that exists in this archetype and almost everything at 3 copies except for the Kingfisher and Tinula, which both are not so good at 3 copies, so I aim to only use them twice. As for the outside support, I use Crystal Girl 3 times, which is a pretty strong card, since it can search any level 5 or higher water monster during the end phase of the turn it was normal or special summoned, and it can special summon itself back from the graveyard if there is a level 5 or higher water monster on the field, being able to use the effect multiple times and also banishing itself if it leaves the field, making your Yugioh Archetypes even stronger. So this card is like made for the archetype, perfect. The same goes for the Sword Soul boss monster, which is level 10 and water. So he also is very useful for your archetype since he supports banishing, weakens the opponent's monster, strengthens your monsters, and is all around the perfect card to be included in an Icejade strategy. And the rest of the extra deck is pretty much your everyday stuff you can switch around if you like. I chose to run it like this, but feel free to adjust it and add Zeus or Underworld Goddess or even Psychic and Punisher. There's a lot you can do with the extra deck and this deck. Feel free to experiment with it. All in all, you can't do so much special stuff with the strategy just yet, since there's not so much support if you choose to run it as a pure strategy, as you can see. So I did my best to keep it in the water kind of way. So let's take a look at how the ranking looks for this archetype. As always, this ranking is based on if you play the strategy as a pure strategy, like in the example Decklist. So let's start. The OTK potential of this deck is not very high, that much is true. It's a slow stun strategy that doesn't usually OTK your opponent with any kind of tools. The defensive tools, on the other hand, are amazing. There's no other archetype in the whole game that can defend himself like Icejade can do. No matter how your opponent removes your cards, they will be replaced or be reborn, and you have a strong stun strategy on top of that. So you might as well say Icejade is the strongest defensive archetype that exists in the game currently. I also give the control options a 6 out of 6 stars purely since the Icejade lockdown with locking down effect monsters is very similar to a Mystic Mine lockdown, and it's one-sided. That combined with your quick effect banishing and your quick effect negation is creating a very strong control strategy. But your removal options are very limited. You have your one bounce with your Kingfisher and the non-targeting banish, which is very good, but that's all. You don't have anything else, so the removal options are very limited. But the recovery and recycling is very strong. The only reason I don't give it 6 stars is because you cannot recycle your spell and trap cards without outside support. That's actually the reason why in my example deck list I play Framelord Omega to be able to recycle these cards. And finally, the card advantage you generate is not so much, it's pretty normal. You won't ever get the biggest upper hand to your opponent. It's a slow control game in which you slowly draw your cards. Finally, the overall rating is a 5 from 6, and if you wonder why it's so high, look at it like if you play Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and you are able to reach the Diamond rank 1, then it would be a 6 out of 6. But I don't think this strategy is up to the task, so that's why it's more like a 5 from 6. And don't expect to have any meta impact with this strategy. Finally, what's left to say is that Icejade is a very interesting and unique strategy. It won't always win, it's not super strong, but it is very interesting to achieve this lockdown, which is very strong indeed. And you have the strongest defensive tools imaginable at your disposal, so that's very nice. Feel free to give it a try. That's it from me for today. See you next time, bye bye.